isn't it great when you actually just have your own show opener? You don't have to deal with any sponsors for this week at least. It's going to be a different show. So, without being sponsored by CWF, we're going to do a shorter show this week. Next week's show is going to be a lot longer. We're going to be looking at the Royal Rumble. And we're going to look not just at the fact that the Royal Rumble's happening next Sunday, because we've already done the spoilers of who we think's going to win. What we're going to look at is actually kind of the people over the years who've won and what's happened when there's been changes. So in 93, the Royal Rumble started to give you a title shot, which was a massive deal. But let's not ignore the year before. Ric Flair won the world title at the Royal Rumble 92. So we'll look at things like weird events that have happened at the Royal Rumble, superstar returns. We'll look at all those cool things and we'll find out exactly why we love the Royal Rumble every year. And last year was no exception. Let's look, what was the best moment? Was it Edge returning with the bubbling lip? Was it Drew McIntyre winning after kicking out Brock Lesnar? To be honest, both moments are probably going to stick in my mind for a very long time, and both moments nearly woke up everybody in the house, which I know is the same for quite a lot of people I speak to about wrestling, but that's for next week. For this week, we're not going to be talking about the wrestling shows. We're just going to be talking about some of the wrestling news, and the reason we're going to do that is because I think this week we just want to do something a little bit shorter and talk about what's going on in the business as opposed to talking about what's happened on TV. Combined with the fact that I've been so busy with dissertation, this is just a nice little escape for me because I haven't watched wrestling this week. And do you know what? It's probably been a good thing. From what I hear, wrestling's not been great. However, by the time this goes up, we will be getting ready to see Goldberg and Drew McIntyre in the ring again, which should be quite interesting. Even if you don't want it to happen, it should be quite interesting. On top of that, the WWE have just had some major news, but we'll talk about that in the main body of the show. So where do we start? Let's start with the most COVID-related news this week. Fightful is reporting that WWE has been making talent, trainees especially, unhappy with the way the training has been scheduled. After spending a few months away from the Performance Center, trainees were brought back a few days a week before returning to a full-time schedule. Training 5 days a week during the pandemic has a few of the trainees upset. Now, to make matters worse, trainees say that they're only being tested for COVID-19 once a week. Prior to returning full-time, trainees were taking part in virtual classes. Now, this is going to seem like everything we're talking about this week is opinion corner, but if they're sticking to their bubbles and they are being tested, they shouldn't have to be tested every day. The simple fact is, if you're sticking to your bubble due to the period that it takes to become infected, then it should be very simple to lock down once somebody is found to be carrying COVID. The problem is that this is kind of a great model for how we get back to the world. There is going to be fear. Everybody's going to be panicking. I know what it was like when somebody in my work was off getting tested because they thought they had it. The problem is that everybody eventually is going to have to return to work and everybody is going to be worried. I've been quite lucky. I've been able to continue working the whole time. So I haven't had that sitting at home for a few months waiting to go back. I know a few people who were very worried when the first lockdown finished and they're going back out there to work. I think WWE are testing people more than just about any industry. I know people in the oil industry who are tested before they go out and aren't tested again until they come home. So a lot of people very critical of WWE, and there's plenty to be critical of. But I think being critical of WWE for trying to train their people is, for me, it's just people being overly cautious. I get people want to be overly cautious, but at some point, these people will have to go back to training. At some point, these people will need to realize that if they're being tested a couple of times a week and they're sticking to their bubble and they can trust the people that they're working with to stick to their bubble, then they should be fine. And for indications of that, let's look at football here in Scotland and football down in England. The players are not tested every day. The players are tested at regular intervals and prior to matches and stuff like that. And the problem here is that when does testing become too much? Because if the players are sticking to their bubble at Rangers, the team that I support, or any other team you support who aren't winners, then if you test people every day, then you actually dedicate so much time to testing that it's constantly going to be in people's minds. One day, we're not going to be talking about COVID the way that we are. And people are going to want to be back training. I know there's people in Scotland. I've spoken to a handful of Scottish talents over the past 2-3 months, and all they want is to be able to return to training on a regular basis. They're happy to do so whilst being in small classes, being in bubbles, social distancing as much as physically possible. They're happy to do all this. The problem for me is that the trainees seem very worried about this. Yet you look around, the main roster is performing every week. AEW's main roster is performing every week. There are wrestling shows happening. And the argument that, oh, well, they're training 5 days a week, so they're more at risk. If you're maintaining your bubble, then the risk shouldn't be drastically higher than what's happening for professional footballers here in Scotland. They're training most days. The days where they're not is their mandated rest days. There's still periods where they're having to work together. So it should be no different for the trainees in WWE, especially when you have no audiences, which was the number one way for people to learn and develop. WWE need to get people in and need to get them learning. It's certainly going to be something that I think the WWE over the next few months obviously need to monitor. If there's a case, then you lock down. Spend a week locking down, figuring out what's going on, letting everybody feel comfortable. And then as things ease off and you find out that you're safe and you can test the people who are coming back, then you can find out who has something and who doesn't. And for me, when you start to worry and just go, well, here's the problem. Is it the fact that they're in 5 days that's too much, or would 2 days be okay? And if they were tested on those 2 days, would it be okay? Well, if you're tested on 2 days and you're fine, and you're tested on 5, would being tested every day be okay by them? Because if they were tested every day, then at least they would know they don't have it. The problem is, if you're tested a couple of times a week, that should catch most things pretty quickly. And it just seems like, and nobody's attributed any names to any of this. Fightful are just reporting that this is the case. And for me, that's kind of a problem because nobody's willing to attach their name to this. For me, it suggests, it just might not be true. Now, one thing that I actually kind of hope is true, because she was on a wrestling podcast this week, and I would love to see not just this person, but several of her co-stars appearing. Certainly, the two male leads from this show appearing in wrestling would be hilarious. It's happened, and it happened in their TV show. What am I talking about? I'm talking about Boy Meets World. I'm talking about the fact that Sean and Corey were involved in a match involving Vader on the Boy Meets World show that, quite frankly, at the time, I thought was absolutely amazing. I thought it was great that you had a wrestler in the show, and Vader played one of the main characters, well, one of the main characters, but one of the main character's friend's dads, who wasn't around a lot because he was always wrestling. For me, it was very cool. But what is very cool and has come across from the podcast that she did, she was a guest on Wrestling with Will. She discussed her history with professional wrestling as a fan. Now, she presents the AEW Dynamite Awards with her husband Jensen Karp. She said that she's actually still in the dark about who won because they taped an announcement for everybody, and that means that they won't know who won until they watch it on TV. AEW doing a great job of an award ceremony. Now, it's all a virtual event, but still, I think that's very cool. They're presenting the breakout male and female. She doesn't know the winners. They were given cards and they just read out the names. And what's funny is that she's the one who's been tweeting about the Young Bucks. She's been commenting about AEW. She's a very big WWE fan. And I think everybody of my age at some point had a crush on Topanga from Boy Meets World. Well, Danielle Fishel Karp is Topanga from Boy Meets World and Girl Meets World, the sequel with the daughter, which isn't as good. And really, I watched just for the moments when Sean and Corey have their moments together. Now, Fishel has become quite known. She was asked about the possibility of ever stepping in the ring, and while she says she's entertained the thought, she feels she'd be more suited as a manager. I think it would be hilarious if she came in as a manager, but I don't think she could do that in WWE. I don't think she could maybe do that in one of those companies. AEW, perhaps, I think, as a one-off, as a celebrity appearance, I think it would work. I personally would pop for it as a one-off. I don't think I'd pop for it happening on a regular basis. And I think the reason is because the novelty, the idea of somebody from your childhood being connected with something from your childhood is very cool. But for me, much like many other times when we look at stuff like this, I'm not a fan of the idea of somebody who's not trained in that role just coming in and doing it. And I know sometimes people like Vicky Guerrero have stepped in and done quite well, but Daniel runs her own company, which, by the way, is ridiculously expensive for all the stuff, but apparently it's really good. But I would love to see her appearing once, maybe twice. Once to build it up, once at a pay-per-view with a payoff. Maybe she does something that's a little bit Boy Meets World like. She's quite a bossy character in the show, and she knows it all. So it'd be quite funny to see that happen. But the thought of her doing it on a regular basis, I think the novelty would wear off quite quickly, much like it did with Vicky Guerrero. Now, let's look at one other thing here from Lance Storm. Now, if anybody's not a fan of Lance Storm, and that's fine. He's talking about on Saturday. He was speaking about not liking the supernatural, unrealistic stuff that's happening in wrestling. Obviously, he's referring to Randy Orton and Bray Wyatt, which I myself have become quite disillusioned with. The fact that the Fiend's gone, they've had to kind of find ways of prolonging that story, which has involved fireballs from Alexa Bliss, and Randy Orton's now wearing a mask that makes him look like he should be in The Oddities. And of course, it's given a chance for Randy to develop some interesting personality traits in recent weeks. But they've had to pre-record quite a lot of stuff, which means the fans aren't there. And certainly they couldn't get away with that if Raw and SmackDown had fans every week. Now, he admits that he is rigid, Lance Storm being the he's rigid yet passionate about how he likes his pro wrestling. He expresses frustrations of having to suspend his disbelief a little too much when it comes to watching WWE, AEW, and Impact. Now, he was on Wrestling Observer Live, and he mentioned that he couldn't finish watching WWE Raw after seeing a certain segment with Randy Orton. Now, this is what he had to say. I didn't get through the show, to be perfectly honest. I mentioned it before. I guess when I was looking at the Abaddon Shida match, that I said, I don't want any more zombies. I'm tired of the supernatural unrealistic. You have to suspend your disbelief to another dimension stuff. And the Randy Orton promo with the mask being all burnt, I thought was pushing my level of suspension of disbelief. But when it got to her sitting on the playground and stuff, I'm like, I can't take this. And it's not aimed at WWE. Impact did the Dark Realm and the Murder Mystery, and AEW is doing the Abaddon thing. WWE has done all kinds of theme-related things, and again, maybe it's working for some people that they're having to branch in a new direction for the pandemic, but it's not something that I like in wrestling, and I can't get around it. Now, that's such a great opinion, because I actually agree. Now, I do like Bray Wyatt, and I do like the playful side of it, but it's gone from that being an element of the character to now they're having to do things for Alexa Bliss, to now Randy Orton's doing these things. Now we have to believe that Randy Orton's face is burnt. Well, they did that with Kane and then had to reveal when he took off his mask that he wasn't burnt. Burns do not heal very quickly. Burns suck. So we now have to believe that either Randy Orton's going to take a couple of months off and come back and be relatively okay, or he's going to wear a mask for 6 months until those burns are healed up. But for me, I agree with Lance Storm on this. I think it's unrealistic to continue doing these things. And certainly if you are going to do them, It should be every now and again. It shouldn't be every week. The Undertaker. Everybody thinks The Undertaker was gimmicks every week and all these flashy things. The most gimmick thing about The Undertaker was his entrance and the fact that he sat up and played dead. Well, undead, really. But he had these big moments like the Bolt of Lightning, the casket going on fire, the Buried Alive match, the Hell in a Cell. These things were not every week. These things, if you look at the list, there's maybe 10 things that he did that involved the special effects team, like burying Paul Bearer. These things were not happening every week. They were happening every now and again. So it's interesting to see WWE doing this every week. It's almost like they're kind of rolling the dice just a little too much. Now, on that note, Drew McIntyre, who is the champion, he spoke with Riju Dasgupta of SK Wrestling. As one of WWE's top stars, some fans want to see McIntyre compete in cinematic matches, and he made it clear, as long as he has the title, he'd rather compete in traditional matches. And I think that's great. I don't think we're going to see Roman Reigns competing in a cinematic match, certainly unless we go into full lockdown again and something needs to happen that's a little bit different. This is what Drew had to say. I'm WWE champion, and I think, in fact, I know that the way I've been building the title, it's about the honor and respect and about wrestling. And there's room in the show for everything, a little bit of something for everybody. It'd be boring if everybody was the same. And the Fiend's unique character is so incredible, so out there, but that's not something I want to mix the WWE title with. That's for that portion of the audience, and for me as a fan to watch and be blown away by the spectacle, but it comes to the WWE Championship. I expect it to be in a wrestling match, man on man, fighting over the title for respect and honor, and that's what I'm all about. Could not be any more of a Drew McIntyre fan. And then you hear comments like that and realize that this is a guy who is capable of using what power he has to actually protect that belt, and that's what it should be. I think Drew's done a great job of getting himself in a position where he can use what stroke he's built up to actually do something productive. I'm entirely unsure why he lost the title and now has a second reign, but at the same time, it's clear that he wants to work with new people, and there's an opportunity to get that belt back over with somebody who actually cares. The fact that he's doing this long, slow burn with Sheamus, which everybody knows Sheamus is going to turn heel and attack Drew and try and take the belt from him. But what if there's something else at play? And the great thing is that Drew is aware that this is there. Now, Sheamus has already been on top of the mountain multiple times and won everything there is to win. McIntyre said, but over the past few years, he's been more of a tag wrestler and floating around, not really doing anything at the top of the card. Someone like Sheamus, I think, is an interesting one because as long as he's been around, it's been a while since he's been at the top of the mountain, just the same as Jinder. We have a real relationship. It would be incredible. And I think where I'm at right now would help pull him to where he belongs on the card. That shows an attitude that I can't think of a whole lot of wrestlers having since the likes of Bret Hart. And people will say, Bret Hart was selfish. The Montreal Screwjob was this. The Montreal Screwjob was that. Well, you're wrong. Ask Sean Waltman about the impact that having a match with Bret Hart had in his career. Ask several of the talent in the 90s about how they felt working with Bret Hart, and they improved. Not only did they improve, they actually got to be on TV or got to be in a position where they were actually getting a chance to show how good they were. Now, talking about showing how good they are, Hideki Suzuki apparently is headed to WWE. Tokyo Sports have reported the former Pro Wrestling Noah star was spotted at the international terminal of the Haneda Airport in Tokyo, Japan. A one-way ticket to the United States, and there's speculation that that is for the WWE. Now, he did work as a guest coach at the Performance Center last year, but as of this writing, he is not signed with the WWE. There is a picture floating around on Chris Hero's Instagram of Chris Hero, Drew Gulak, and Suzuki as well. The one thing that's quite interesting here is the way that they report, and again, I said that today's show was going to be basically like a big opinion corner. The fact that he's heading to America means he's signing for WWE. For me, that could be the case, but these sites are reporting this, and they're reporting this in a way that for me is not very fair. We'll get to more about that in a minute, when we talk about WWE's big signing this week. Now, Chris Statlander has revealed something that I find quite interesting, which is why it's so difficult to unionize wrestling. Now, this is what she had to say. It's hard to say because it wouldn't be like just the major companies that have to work with unions. It's not like there's one big company that owns wrestling. We have a few really big companies and we have a few TV companies all over the world, plus thousands of independent promotions. And to have just one person to have the set rules and set all the boundaries for every single thing that goes on in wrestling, where even now in states, like in separate states, some states you need a license to wrestle, some states you don't. I feel like there's so much the business kind of just what it is. And that's how it's been for years now. It's going to be hard to somewhat change. I think every wrestler sort of fancies the idea of being able to get benefits and whatnot and get set pay. But a lot of people that come into wrestling don't always want it to be their job for life. And here's the thing that's quite interesting. She mentioned set pay. Now, set pay for me is a problem. If you're looking at WWE, set pay is something that Ryback has suggested every wrestler should be paid the same. Which is ridiculous. If you believe that every wrestler should be paid the same, you're a commie and you should be shot. Not really, but it's that ridiculous. That is like arguing the same thing producer Zoe Styles argued when she was 17, which is that binmen and lawyers should be paid the same because they both contribute to society. Never mind the fact that the lawyer has spent 6 or 7 years investing in himself and been working for free and getting cups of coffee for absolute assholes above them. And the binman has no discernible skill. And yes, it's still hard work being a binman. We're not taking that away from the binman. But it's a menial task. You know, I work in a shop. I work in retail. Should I be paid the same as a doctor or a nurse who saves people's lives? No. Because the justification there is they are doing something more important than me. And I'm not offended by that. I don't demand to be paid the same as the person who's above me. Why? Because where's the incentive for people to improve? And that's what wrestling's always been about. Does the system need to be more structured? Absolutely. Would a union work? Well, I think Chris Statlander has laid out a pretty clear way of why it wouldn't work. The WWE already give benefits to employees. And if you look, people who are angry that WWE haven't paid for their rehab, etc., like Sonny. Sonny was angry because they didn't pay for her rehab for like the 12th time. Well, Scott Hall had it more times. Scott Hall also played within the system a little bit, whereas you didn't. And that's kind of where there's a lot of people who would feel like somehow the union owed them, even though they would still need to be contributing something. And that's the problem I have with this. I'm a reasonably well-educated person. You know, I have been to university and still am. And I'm the person who would love the idea of everybody being paid more. But at the same time, a business needs to make a profit to be able to invest in the business to create that job that you need. If you look at all these things online and, you know, this £80 pair of shoes, the person who made them is paid £6. Okay. But then you also have the advertising costs, shipping costs. You have to get it into a retail outlet, or you have to provide the website. And all of these things cost money with no guarantee that that shoe will be sold. When that shoe is sold, that becomes profit, and then investment is made in the company as well. Why should the person who takes the risk with all their money finance everybody else's life and not actually make money themselves? If you believe that somehow because you make the shoe, you have equal right to the money from that shoe, then why don't you set up your own shoe company? Oh, well, the reason you don't set up your own shoe company is because you don't have the money. If you were paid more, you'd set up your own shoe company, right? It's ridiculous. Just look at what happened in New York when everybody's minimum wage went up. And what did McDonald's do? Well, if people still want to buy burgers at the same price, they have to find ways to cut costs. So one way to do that is to cut back on labor. So they put in computers which did the job of the human. And people were angry that jobs were cost. Okay, so let's put up the price of the burgers. Then McDonald's lose out because nobody's willing to spend money on the burgers. There's a simple and clear economic argument for why minimum wage doesn't work. There's academic papers on it. The academic papers demonstrate how just paying people more isn't always the answer. And in wrestling, that isn't always the answer. I did mention on last week's show this when Ryback was talking about contracts, the idea that just paying people more money fixes the problem. If you negotiate your deal and you're happy with it, you can't then go and bitch about it because you didn't like the deal. You negotiated it. If anything, you're the dumbass that accepted it. oh, well, there's not really anything else going, so go and get a real job. If you're not happy with the contract you're being offered by a big company, go and get. Nobody's telling you have to work for WWE or AEW. The simple fact that people assume WWE are screwing them over, when in reality, if the business has a downturn, WWE absorb that. WWE take in all of the impact of that. When your T-shirts at live shows sell 1,000, WWE have bought 2,000 to have, so that you have the opportunity to sell them. If they don't sell, that money goes down the drain, but you still get a paycheck at the end of the month. And if you're happy with the idea that somebody else takes all the risk and you get paid money, you're an idiot. If you feel that strongly, do what Stuart Murphy at CWF has done, set up your own company. Otherwise, shut up, stop being a little bitch. Now, let's move on. There was some thought that the WWE superstar, I'm still going to call him a WWE superstar because that's how I know him, CM Punk is quarantining. He was asked if he had it, and he responded, I do not have COVID. I'm quarantining as a mandatory safety guideline for a job. So this is quite interesting. Now, I know people reacted very badly. Again, like I said, this is an opinion corner special of this show. WWE have quarantined people to allow them to come into their bubble. And I know lots of film companies are requiring the same from actors who are then going to enter in their bubble to be filming. Tom Cruise was insulted by many media outlets because he wanted to do the same system and he was very strict about how people were. The thing is, if you do quarantine, if he is in isolation for a set period of time and then shows up to the film set and everybody else has been in isolation and they all test negative, then the bubble should have no COVID in it. That's the thought process. That's the plan. That's why I think earlier on when we're talking about WWE and people are unhappy that they're having to work 5 days a week, think about the people who are working in supermarkets. They don't have the privilege to isolate for all this time and still be paid. Yes, they had furlough payments. But if you have to isolate for 2 weeks, there's absolutely no money coming to you other than statutory sick pay. Yeah, these little prima donnas want to complain because they have to show up and work. Some other people have to show up and work. Now, the Alberto Del Rio trial has been postponed. He's facing 1 count of aggravated kidnapping and 4 counts of sexual assault and is facing life in prison. Now, he was arrested in May 2020 after he accused the victim of infidelity. Del Rio allegedly physically assaulted her. Now, the former WWE star was supposed to start his trial in San Antonio, Texas. However, it's been postponed until May the 3rd. I know there's a lot of changes to court processes. I know here in Scotland, there's a lot of virtual trials taking place. I think this is something that certainly needs to be tried in front of a jury, particularly as Paige has been out and done some interviews. There's a lot of stuff we really don't know yet about Alberto Del Rio. And if he were to be put in jail for life, that would be a massive deal. And I don't want to downplay this, but think of the last big name wrestler to be jailed for a prolonged period of time. I can't think of who that would be. You have lots of ex-wrestlers who are jailed for a long period of time. But Alberto Del Rio was doing MMA shows and still working, and he was involved in various things. Alberto Del Rio is still a big name in his home country. Alberto Del Rio is still known. People still know who he is. So it's for me, it's just one of those things you look at and it's a big deal. I'm a massive fan of Alberto Del Rio's in-ring work, but I suppose this kind of becomes a Chris Benoit thing where it doesn't really matter how good somebody is. When you hear these things, it kind of leaves that bad taste in your mouth. I've watched a Chris Benoit match since everything with Chris Benoit, and it was enjoyable watching the content, but you feel dirty at the end. And certainly I think Alberto Del Rio needs to be aware of how serious this is. Allegations have not just come from this one person. Paige has alleged similar things, and I know his ex-wife has alleged abuse. So it just goes to show, again, Martin's Opinion Corner, we're coming into this era of the speaking out movement. And one of the things that I think is a problem is people were talking about this. People were talking about what kind of person he is. He was still getting booked. He's still out there and he still has the opportunity to do these things. And, you know, some women believe they can fix guys like this. And in other scenarios, you have performers and bosses who believe, well, their personal life has nothing to do with them on screen. But these things are important, and these things are part of who they are. And that, for me, is a problem with WWE. Because I think somebody like Del Rio with these charges wouldn't get booked. But they knew the allegations about him and Paige, and there was discussions at the start of last year of bringing him back, which obviously with Paige not being on the roster wouldn't have been a massive deal. There is no marketable value in him in WWE because his second run was so poor. But I guess we're kind of seeing that in Scotland. A few of the people involved in the Speaking Out movement, and I know for a fact CWF, our former sponsor, had communication with Joey Ryan. I know for a fact that other people who have been involved in the allegations have spoken to their owner, Stuart Murphy. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens. But we're going to move into the big opinion corner piece now, and we're going to talk about WWE and the WWE Network. Okay, so this has been an opinion corner special. And one of the things that's quite interesting I saw today, What Culture, not even going to click on their page to give them the like because it's just not going to happen. I am sick and tired, and I mean this, I'm sick and tired of wrestling websites and the clickbait. As far as I'm concerned, the amount of clickbait we have in professional wrestling reporting is ridiculous. And I think if you are having to report things like WWE Network shut down, then you're an idiot. If that's how you have to advertise and you have to sell your website by putting out what is essentially scaremongering for people who are WWE Network subscribers, that's not the reality because people only see that. There's academic papers on this. People don't always read stories. They read the headlines. And if you're sat there and you're thinking, well, I'm smart enough, I don't do that, I guarantee if you share me your Facebook to at Headlock Lockdown on Twitter, and I go and look through your Facebook, I guarantee you have posted something that comes from a headline. Everybody's done it. I've done it. There isn't a person that isn't guilty of this. Wrestling news sites seem to be the most clickbaity, and What Culture is one of the worst offenders. Wrestle Talk is slowly catching up with them, but there's quite a few of them from America. It's just a shame that the two that are pissing me off the most right now are British. And I know there's at least one person out there that won't like me talking about British, but at the end of the day, it's British. Wrestle Talk and What Culture are both British, and they're both copying this idea that clickbait is important. But what people don't realize is it leaves this bad taste in your mouth when you have clickbait. And the biggest thing of clickbait that I've seen this week is the WWE Network is shutting down, and it isn't. This is one of the things that's quite interesting. If you look at the basis of the story, you can argue that American subscribers to the WWE Network will no longer be able to subscribe to just the WWE Network. So they can argue it's shutting down. But it's not. Shutting down means ceasing. It does not mean moving to a new home. The benefit of this is WWE will not have to be the ones that are administering the hosting. They will also not be the ones that have to actually run the damn content anymore. The content is handed to a partner who's going to run it for them. On top of that, let's talk about the announcement. Peacock in America will exclusively stream WrestleMania and all of WWE Network's pay-per-view events, signature documentaries, and more. NBC Universal has a long-standing relationship with WWE that began nearly 30 years ago with Monday Night Raw on the USA Network. WWE has always tapped into the cultural zeitgeist with spectacular live events and larger-than-life characters. We are thrilled to be the exclusive home for the WWE Network and its millions of fans across the country. And that was Rick Cordella, the Executive Vice President and Chief Revenue Officer of Peacock. Now, a few people are talking about the fact that this means WWE Network is stopping. And if you are, then you are an idiot. I say this quite a lot, but there's quite a lot of idiots out there. WWE Network is not ceasing. WWE Network is now going to be part of the Peacock family, which basically means NBC Universal are going to be adding the WWE Network content onto their Peacock streaming service. This means, as Kevin Owens said, wait a second, you can get Kevin Owens and Dwight from The Office on the same streaming service now. That is a huge PR step for WWE. And I don't care if anybody thinks that the WWE are abandoning the network. It's a huge step for WWE and their content. Now, people who want to actually watch the WWE network content can watch it for $5 a month. People are still complaining, yet they're actually capable of halving their costs. Not only halving your costs, but now you have content like The Office and all the other NBC Universal content that's on the Peacock streaming service. This does not mean the WWE network is stopping. It means WWE network's moving to a new home. WWE is going to be paid billions of dollars again for the content that they were already streaming. And people are saying, well, this is a bad thing. What? People were saying that Peacock were going to spend more money providing the WWE content than they would generate from subscribers. Just America alone, 1.1 million people subscribe to the streaming service of WWE. To move over to this new streaming service, which now offers more and for less. You can go for the advert-based one for $5. If you go for the $10 one, you don't have to deal with adverts, but you get all the content. So now you'd have all the WWE Network stuff, because they're going to keep the old shows. That will just be part of the content. But now, Peacock are going to be offering various NBC and Universal shows. And for me, if anybody is turning around and complaining about this, then I hate to belabor this point, you're an idiot. Paying the same amount of money and getting access to premium content. They're also talking about the fact that NBC are going to be ending their sports channel, which means that some of the sports content is going to filter onto the USA Network. It's going to filter onto the NBC channels that they own and the Universal family. But at the same time, and this is important, the Peacock streaming service will gain this stuff as well. So when certain sports like NASCAR filter their way onto Peacock, those NASCAR fans who weren't watching WWE can now watch it as part of the system they're subscribing to. WWE have access to millions of subscribers. And people who said, oh, well, Peacock are losing money on this. Think about it this way. Imagine you're a major company like NBC, and you can make an acquisition that doesn't involve you purchasing a company and having to run it. But you just purchase their content that they've already produced for you, and you stick it on your streaming service, and 1.1 million subscribers come with that on day one. That's good money. Your share price goes up. Your ability to put ad revenue onto your service rises. There's some people in wrestling that only look at the negative. And yeah, there will be negatives. Some people might not have access to the Peacock service in the same way they do the WWE Network. There are the Peacock app, which they can download onto their smart TV or their computer and still watch in the same way they would. But for some people, taking this extra step would be too much. And this is part of the problem. We've spoiled wrestling fans by having content there for you all the time. Yeah, these same fans would have no issue downloading AEW Plus. These same fans would have no issue downloading Impact Plus and paying to watch their content. When in fact, you're going to be getting more content, better value, and on top of that, a company that if Peacock fails, and it won't, but if Peacock fails, then it'll bring down the USA Network and various. It's such a symbiotic relationship. WWE can only gain from this. WWE are going to be adding their 1.1 million subscribers in America to an already established and profitable service. From the Peacock brand, they're adding 1.1 million subscribers. They're able to expose the Peacock brand to new people. And obviously, if people are getting more content for the same price, where's the negative? This is already the business partner of WWE, which means if we were to have the same setup in countries like the United Kingdom, I think the business partner here would be BT Sport. Very similar partner to what they have with USA and NBC and Universal. Moving the WWE network in the United Kingdom as part of a BT Sport package that was the same price where you got to watch Premier League football, and you're telling me people in the UK wouldn't go for that? That would be a huge deal. Or if it wasn't the Premier League football due to the pricing of it, if BT Sport were to turn around and offer a package that provided access to content that was packaged in with the WWE for the same price, people would complain. There's rumors that they were going to put in new packages up to like £15 or £20. So if they follow suit around the world and find business partners, WWE are going to be paid £1 billion rather, over 5 years, 200 million for the content to go to these providers. This is this easy money for WWE because they can they're already churning out content. As the WWE network content around the world migrates from, WWE are not going to have their own servers for the WWE network anymore. I believe they're going to move over to the Peacock servers. And if anything, that'll be an improvement as well, because the Peacock servers are going to be better. Peacock is financed by NBC. They want to get this right first time. The mantra is they're competing with Disney Plus. WWE is joining a system that's competing with the biggest brand in the world. And people still think it's a bad thing. I'm telling you now, it's nothing to do with the deal they signed. Everything to do with the fact that it's WWE. If AEW signed this deal with Peacock, this would be the best thing ever. And anybody who wants to disagree with that is an idiot. I suppose that's my opinion corner this week. Everybody's an idiot. So I got all worked up in the opinion corner. Forgive me, but stop being an idiot. Anyway, I put a poll up on Headlocks Lockdown. Go out of your way to give me an answer. There's only 3 answers. The question is, was last week's home invasion reason enough for me to abandon the CWF partnership? I certainly think that the best thing that we can do is not have the old deal that we had. There was going to be comments from Zoe Styles. She's pissed. We've lost quite a lot of money because we were being sponsored by CWF. And weekly, we were getting paid money. Well, actually, it was being paid monthly, but that's a different thing. Now, that means we don't have a sponsor right now. We're doing this show for the fun of it. And that's kind of, for me, what this is about. It's the fun of it. I'm a huge fan of wrestling and I love talking about it, and I get worked up by it all the time. I was sick and tired of being worked up by the person who's meant to be helping me to do these shows. So I think I throw this out to Stuart Murphy. I'll let the people speak. When the poll ends, whatever the result is, I'll go with. So the 3 answers. The question was, did Stuart Murphy's home invasion last week go too far? Are we correct to end the partnership? If people say yes, then we're done. We're finished. We won't work together anymore. If people say no, then let's sit down at the table, or let's sit down on the show and let's talk about where we go. But they can't be the way they were. I can't be treated the way I was. And there needs to be something legitimate that comes from it. There was an invitation for me to be the host of Show 1 of CWF, and I want to put this out there, Murphy. I'm willing to accept under 2 conditions. 1, I get some press passes because I feel press passes will be useful. Secondly, you apologize. Not me. You apologize for some of the content you've been sending in and asking me to broadcast. By that very nature, I'm willing to apologize to you for allowing some of the content that JJ submitted to be broadcast. We were conflicted about broadcasting it, but we did. So Murphy, I throw it over to you. I'm willing to go wherever the people want. If the people say that I took it a step too far, let's sit down and get this sorted. If people think I've taken it too far, then we're done. Let's respect the results of this poll. At least in Scotland, one of the public's opinions should matter.